I still remember the morning she left. Not with anger. Not with a fight. Just silence. Her coffee cup sat on the table, still half full, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the kitchen. There was no note, no goodbye, no dramatic ending. Only the echo of quiet years we'd spent together. Years I thought I understood, but never really did. My name is Michael Turner, and for most of my life, I believed success was the only thing that defined a man. I built my life around schedules, meetings, and endless plans. I was the kind of man who measured love in gifts, not time, who thought providing a house meant creating a home. But the truth is, my wife Linda never asked for any of that. She wanted something simpler, something I was too proud to understand. I used to laugh when she'd say, "Michael, all I want is a life that feels peaceful, not perfect." I'd pat her hand and tell her, peace comes after success. Looking back now, that was the first crack in our marriage, the moment I stopped hearing her heart and started hearing only myself. We lived in a small town in Vermont. Wooden houses, quiet streets, neighbors who waved from their porches. It was the kind of place where time slowed down for everyone but me. While others enjoyed Sunday walks or barbecues, I was always on my phone, checking work emails. Even at dinner, I'd talk about profits, not people. Linda would smile politely, but her eyes, they were somewhere else. You don't notice it when someone starts to drift away, not if you're too busy being right. At first, it's small things. The way she'd stop waiting for me to eat dinner. The way she'd start going on long evening walks alone. I told myself she just needed space. What I didn't realize was, she needed me. And I wasn't there. The last real conversation we had was on a Sunday morning. She was sitting by the window, her hair catching the sunlight. I remember she looked beautiful, not in a way that demanded attention, but in the quiet, effortless way she always did. She asked me, "Michael, do you ever feel like we're living two different lives under the same roof?" I frowned, already irritated. "Linda, you're overthinking again. Everything's fine. You know how hard I'm working for us." She looked at me for a long moment, then said something I didn't understand until years later. "You're working for a version of us that doesn't exist anymore." I didn't reply. I just grabbed my briefcase, kissed her on the forehead, and left for work. That was the last morning we shared. When I came home that evening, she was gone. Her clothes, her books, even her small potted plant by the window, everything she loved had vanished, as if she'd never been there. I found her wedding ring placed on the kitchen counter beside a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter, just a grocery list. The last thing she wrote was milk. I remember staring at that word for hours, wondering how something so ordinary could hurt so much. I thought she'd come back. A day, maybe two. But the days became weeks, and the silence became my new companion. I called her sister once. She told me Linda was safe, staying somewhere quiet. She said Linda needed time to breathe. I told her to tell Linda I was sorry, but I didn't even know what I was apologizing for. Months passed. The house started to feel colder, emptier. I'd come home from work and sit in the same chair where she used to read. Sometimes I'd hear the wind moving through the trees outside and almost think it was her voice. That's how guilt sounds. It whispers when you least expect it. I tried to move on, but everything reminded me of her. The grocery store aisle where she used to hum. The coffee mug with a crack she refused to throw away. The small garden she planted behind the house, where nothing seemed to grow anymore. And then one evening, I found something that changed everything. While cleaning the attic, I came across an old wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written in her handwriting. Each one addressed to me, but never sent. I remember sitting on the floor, reading through her words until my hands shook. They weren't angry letters. They were filled with hope, disappointment, and love, quiet, enduring love. In one of them she wrote, "Michael, I don't need you to buy me a bigger house. I just need you to come home before dinner's cold. You think I want a grand life. I don't. I just want a simple one, with you in it. That's when it hit me. All the years I spent chasing success, I was running away from the very life she dreamed of. They say revenge is best served cold, but Linda's revenge wasn't made of anger. It was silence. It was her absence, the kind of emptiness that forces you to face yourself. Her leaving was the mirror I never wanted to look into. And by the time I finally did, it was already too late. Before everything fell apart, Linda and I had what most people would call a good life. We had a 2-story house on Maplewood Lane, a nice car, and a reputation for being a respectable couple. From the outside, it looked perfect, two people who had it all figured out. But perfection has a strange way of hiding what's dying underneath. I met Linda when I was 26. Back then, I was just a young man with too many dreams and not enough patience. I worked at a construction firm in town. Long hours, low pay, but a fire in my chest that told me I was meant for something bigger. Linda worked at a local flower shop. She was quiet, graceful, and had this soft laugh that made people stop talking just to listen. The first time I saw her, she was arranging white lilies in a vase. She looked so peaceful that it almost annoyed me. I couldn't understand how someone could be so content doing something so small. I walked in pretending to buy flowers for my mother, but really, I just wanted to know her name. Her eyes met mine, and she smiled. "You don't look like the kind of man who buys flowers often," she said gently. I laughed. Maybe I'm starting now. That's how it began. Not with fireworks or grand gestures, just two people talking among flowers and sunlight. We dated for 2 years. I loved her kindness, her patience, the way she saw beauty in ordinary things. But I also took those things for granted. When I finally proposed, I promised her the world. She only smiled and said, "I don't need the world, Michael. Just you." If only I had listened. The early years of our marriage were simple and happy. We lived in a small rented house near the lake. On weekends, we'd go fishing or make pancakes in the morning. She'd hum to herself while cooking, and I'd read the newspaper, pretending not to enjoy her singing. She used to keep a little notebook where she'd write dreams, not big ones, just little wishes. Plant tomatoes next spring. Go camping in the woods. Watch the first snowfall together. I didn't know then that this was her way of holding on to joy, of keeping life gentle and meaningful. But then came the promotion. The one that changed everything. After 5 years of hard work, I became the youngest project manager in my company. Everyone congratulated me. Linda was proud, or at least she said she was. But that's when I started to change. I started dressing differently, talking differently, spending more time at work and less time at home. Our evenings became shorter. Our conversations became fewer. When she'd ask, "Can we have dinner together tonight?" I'd reply, "I'll try, honey. Big meeting tomorrow." When she'd say, "Let's take a walk by the lake," I'd say, "Maybe next weekend." But next weekend became next month, and then next year. She never complained. Not once. She'd still cook my favorite meals, leave small notes in my briefcase, or remind me to take an umbrella when it rained. I mistook her silence for understanding, but it was really exhaustion. One night, I came home late, close to midnight. The house was quiet. She'd left a plate covered with foil on the counter. The food was cold. Next to it was a small sticky note that read, "You missed dinner again. I hope your meeting went well." I remember staring at it, feeling slightly irritated. I didn't see it as care, I saw it as guilt. That's the thing about pride, it blinds you to love when it's standing right in front of you. Months turned into years. My company grew, and so did my ambition. I started traveling to cities, staying in fancy hotels, shaking hands with men who wore expensive watches and hollow smiles. I thought that was success. I thought I was finally becoming the man I was meant to be. But Linda, she was fading into the background. Her laughter became rare. Her notebook stayed closed. She started spending more time outside, gardening, visiting neighbors, volunteering at the library. I assumed she was happy doing her little things. I didn't realize she was building a life where she didn't have to wait for me anymore. One autumn evening, I came home early, a rare thing. I found her sitting on the porch, knitting something. The light from the sunset made her hair glow gold. I sat beside her, trying to start a conversation. "What are you making?" She smiled faintly. "A scarf." "For me?" I asked, half joking. She looked down at the yarn. "No. For Mrs. Riley. She's been feeling lonely lately." I laughed lightly. "You spend too much time worrying about others, Linda." She looked at me then, really looked. "Maybe. But at least I remember what people need." Her words stung, though she said them softly. I didn't reply. Instead, I changed the subject, asked about the weather, and went inside. That was my pattern, avoiding feelings I didn't know how to handle. That winter, we had our 10th anniversary. I forgot. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too caught up in work. She had planned a small dinner. Candles, homemade pie, her favorite music playing quietly in the background. I came home late again, phone still in hand, jacket still on. The look on her face when I walked through the door. It still haunts me. "You forgot," she said simply. No anger. No tears. Just quiet truth. "I'm sorry, Linda," I mumbled, setting my briefcase down. "Things have been crazy at the office." She nodded slowly. "They always are." That night, we ate in silence. I tried to talk about a project, but she just smiled politely, as if humoring a stranger. I didn't realize it then, but that was the night she stopped hoping I'd change. A few months later, she suggested we take a small trip, just a weekend away, she said. Somewhere near the mountains, just the two of us. I told her I couldn't. We were bidding on a big contract. I said there'd be other weekends. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You always say that, Michael." "I'll make it up to you," I promised. She nodded, and that was it. She never asked again. After that, she became even quieter. Her world shrank to small things: morning coffee, watering plants, reading by the window. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me from across the room with a look I couldn't decipher. Sadness, maybe. Or resignation. It's strange. When you live with someone long enough, you stop seeing them as they are and start seeing them as part of the furniture. You assume they'll always be there, like the chair by the door or the clock on the wall. You forget that hearts don't stay still forever. Then came the day I overheard her talking to her sister on the phone. "I don't think he's a bad man," she said softly. "Just lost. He's chasing a life that doesn't have room for me anymore." Her voice broke near the end. "I just wish he'd notice before it's too late." I stood in the hallway, frozen. I wanted to go in to tell her I heard, to say she was wrong, but deep down, I knew she wasn't. I told myself I'd fix it soon. But soon never came. Instead, work grew busier, life grew louder, and Linda, quieter. Until one day, silence took her completely. That's the truth of it, simple, unadorned truth. I didn't lose my wife because of betrayal or tragedy. I lost her because of neglect, the quiet kind that eats away at love like rust on steel. She gave me 1,000 chances to see her, and I blinked every time. Now, years later, I can recall every word she said, every small gesture she made to keep us alive. And the worst part? They were all so simple. So painfully simple. A dinner together. A walk by the lake. A conversation before bed. A life she wanted, one I was too busy to give. The years that followed blurred together. Days that looked the same, seasons that changed outside the window while our marriage stayed frozen inside. I still went to work every morning, still brought home paychecks, still played my role as a husband in all the visible ways. But beneath the routine, something had quietly died. We didn't fight often. That's what fooled me. I used to think the absence of arguments meant we were doing fine. But silence can be far more dangerous than shouting. It's not peace, it's distance disguised. Linda had learned how to live without expecting anything from me. And I had learned how to be comfortable with that. One spring evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, reading a book. "Hey," I said, loosening my tie. "You didn't make dinner?" She looked up with calm eyes. "I ate earlier." "Oh," I replied awkwardly. "Long day at the office. I'll just grab something." She nodded and returned to her book. No tension. No bitterness. Just quiet acceptance. And that scared me more than anger would have. For the first time, I realized she didn't wait for me anymore. She didn't ask where I'd been, or why I was late, or whether I'd eaten. She had stopped caring about answers because she'd stopped asking questions. There's something strange about realizing you've become a guest in your own home. The things that used to feel familiar start to look different. Her laughter was gone, replaced by soft humming while she worked in the garden. Her side of the bed was cold by the time I came home. The smell of her cooking, the one that used to greet me at the door, faded away. Instead, I began to hear the sound of her independence. The kettle whistling in the morning when she made tea for herself. The faint music coming from the living room while she painted. The squeak of the back door closing as she went out for her evening walks, alone. She had built a quiet life that didn't need me in it. And I was too proud to admit how much that hurt. One Saturday, I decided to take her out for dinner, a small attempt to bridge the distance. I found her trimming roses in the garden, her hair tied back, sunlight dancing on her face. "Linda," I called, trying to sound casual, "how about dinner tonight? There's a new place downtown." She looked up, surprised. "Dinner?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "You and me. Like old times." She smiled faintly. "That sounds nice, Michael. But I already made plans." "Plans?" I frowned. "With who?" "Margaret from the library. We're going to the community fair." I hesitated. "Oh. Well, maybe tomorrow then." "Sure," she said softly, though her tone told me tomorrow would be no different. I watched her go back to trimming roses, realizing that my wife, the woman I thought I'd always have, had found a life that had nothing to do with me. At work, people admired me. They said I was driven, dependable, focused. I wore that praise like armor, pretending it meant something. But in quiet moments, driving home at night, eating alone in my office, I started to feel an emptiness I couldn't name. I began noticing things that never used to bother me. The way the house felt too large for two people. The echo of my footsteps in the hallway. The unopened books she once read aloud to me. She stopped asking about my projects, and I stopped offering to share. Our lives had become parallel lines, close, but never touching. Then came the day she got sick. It was nothing serious, just a cold, she said. But when I came home that evening, I found her sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, pale and coughing softly. "Linda, why didn't you tell me you were feeling this bad?" I asked, setting my briefcase down. She smiled weakly. "You've been busy. I didn't want to bother you." Her words were gentle, but they cut deep. Bother me. That's what I had become to her. A man too occupied to be part of her small struggles. I made her soup, awkwardly. She thanked me, but her eyes carried that quiet sadness I couldn't meet. We didn't talk much that night. But something shifted inside me, a whisper, a warning. I started to see how far we had drifted, but I still didn't know how to swim back. A few weeks later, she asked if I could drive her to visit her parents in another town. I said I'd check my schedule. She smiled and said she'd take the bus instead. That weekend, I stayed home, working on reports. When I looked out the window and saw her walking down the street with her small suitcase, it hit me. I had become the kind of husband who let his wife leave alone. I stood at the window for a long time, watching her disappear around the corner. I wanted to run after her. I wanted to tell her that she was more important than any meeting, any client, any dream. But I didn't. Because men like me always think there's time. We live as if love will wait forever. When she returned 2 days later, something about her felt different. She was calmer, lighter, as if she had made peace with something I didn't understand. That night, she made dinner, something she hadn't done in months. She even lit candles. I thought maybe this was her way of forgiving me, of finding our rhythm again. Halfway through the meal, she looked up and said quietly, "Michael, are you happy?" I froze. What kind of question is that? She smiled faintly. Just wondering. I'm fine, I said. Work's been demanding, but things are looking good. She nodded. You always talk about work when I ask about you. Her voice wasn't angry. It was observant, almost tender, like she had already accepted the truth I still refused to see. After dinner, she stood up and started clearing the plates. Linda, I said finally, are you happy? She paused, her back turned to me. I think I'm learning how to be. That was the moment I realized she had already started saying goodbye, just not out loud. In the months that followed, she spent more and more time away from home. Volunteering at shelters. Teaching kids at the library. Helping old neighbors with groceries. She filled her days with kindness, the kind I never had time for. And then came the night I found her sitting by the fire, holding that little notebook she used to keep her dreams in. She was reading it slowly, her eyes glistening. I sat down beside her and asked, "What's that?" She smiled softly. Just something I used to believe in. Still dreaming. I tried to joke. She closed the notebook. No. I think I'm done waiting for dreams that don't fit my life anymore. I didn't understand then, that was her goodbye. A week later, she came to me in the kitchen. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while, she said calmly. I need time to think. My first instinct was pride. About what? About us, she said. About me. I laughed dryly, pretending it didn't hurt. You're overreacting, Linda. We're fine. She looked at me for a long moment. You keep saying that, Michael. But we haven't been fine for years. And then she did something that will stay with me forever. She reached out, touched my hand gently and said, "You're a good man. Just not the man I married anymore." There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just truth. The kind that leaves no room for arguments. She packed her things the next morning. I watched her fold clothes, place them neatly in her suitcase, move with the same grace she always had. Linda, I said quietly, how long will you be gone? She paused, looked at me with a sad smile, and whispered, I don't know. When the door closed behind her, it didn't sound like would meeting would. It sounded like finality. For weeks after she left, I lived in denial. I kept expecting her to call, to text, to come home. I'd leave the porch light on at night, just in case. But days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier. I tried to distract myself with work, but even that started to crumble. I'd stare at my computer screen and see her handwriting in the margins of my notes. I'd hear her voice in my head, gentle and steady, Michael, all I wanted was a simple life. I started walking by the lake on weekends, the same one we used to visit when we were younger. The water was still, the trees reflected perfectly in its surface. That's where I realized, she had taken the calm I never valued and carried it with her. Without her, even peace felt lonely. People at work began noticing I wasn't the same. My focus slipped, my temper shortened. A colleague once asked if I was okay. I smiled and said I was just tired. But inside, I was unraveling. Everywhere I looked, I saw her, not physically, but in memories. In the grocery store, I'd reach for the cereal she liked. At home, I'd find her hairpins in drawers, her books left half-read. Regret became my new companion, quiet, heavy, and always present. Then, one rainy night, I got a call from her sister. Michael, she said, her voice trembling slightly, Linda wanted me to tell you something. She's moving, Permanently. Out of town. I felt something tighten in my chest. She's not coming back? There was a long pause. She says she's happy. She found a little place near the coast. She just wants to live quietly. I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry. Her sister hesitated, then added softly, she said to tell you, thank you for everything. Thank you. 2 words that sounded like forgiveness and finality. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the rain. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what silence could do. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was the echo of everything I never said. Her leaving wasn't punishment. It was revelation. The life she built without me, that was her revenge. Quiet, graceful, complete. And as I stared at her empty chair across the room, I finally whispered the words I should have said years ago. I see you now, Linda. I finally see you. But she was already gone. Life, I've learned, doesn't always deliver justice in the way we expect. Sometimes it doesn't shout or strike back. Sometimes it whispers, and you only hear it when the noise of your own ego fades away. After Linda left, the world felt quiet, too quiet. For months, I moved like a man half awake. My house echoed differently now. The coffee machine still gurgled every morning, but no one laughed at the way I overfilled my mug. The TV played the same news, but the silence beside me grew heavier each day. I kept telling myself I was doing fine. I buried myself in work, pushing harder than before, staying later than anyone else. I told myself it was about dedication, but it wasn't. It was guilt. I didn't want to go home to that emptiness. I didn't want to see the spaces she used to fill. But life has a strange way of revealing what you refuse to see. It started one evening when I left the office late, long after everyone had gone. As I walked through the parking lot, I noticed one of our delivery trucks parked in the back. Its engine was still running. That was odd. Our drivers were never around that late. Curiosity pulled me closer. Through the windshield, I saw Paul, the same coworker who used to joke that Linda was too good for a quiet man like me. He was on the phone, laughing softly. I couldn't hear the words, but when he looked up, I saw his expression shift, guilt, or maybe surprise. He hung up quickly and drove off without acknowledging me. That small moment stuck with me. It wasn't just suspicion, it was something deeper. A realization that while I'd been busy chasing promotions and deadlines, there had been other conversations, other worlds, forming behind my back. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Little comments people made. The way certain colleagues avoided eye contact when her name came up. One afternoon, I overheard 2 interns whispering near the break room. Did you hear? Linda's bakery got a feature in the local paper, one said. Oh yeah, I saw that. It said she started it with some help from her business partner. Paul, right? The words landed like a quiet explosion inside me. Paul. The man who used to sit next to me, share lunches, laugh about office gossip. The man I'd once trusted. I didn't confront him, not yet. The old me might have. But I'd changed. I wasn't angry, I was tired. I didn't want a shouting match or some childish fight. What I wanted was understanding, and perhaps, a quiet kind of justice. So I did what I always did best, I watched. I waited. I visited Linda's bakery one Sunday morning. I parked across the street and sat there for nearly an hour, just observing. The place was small but beautiful. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the smell of bread drifted through the crisp air. I saw Linda inside, laughing with a customer. Her hair was tied back, her hands dusted with flour. She looked happy. And then, a few minutes later, Paul walked in. He wore casual clothes, not his usual pressed shirts. He helped her lift a box, smiled, said something that made her laugh again. I could have driven away right then. But instead, I stayed. I watched them work together, the rhythm between them easy and natural. I realized that whatever they had, it wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about what I'd lost by not valuing what was already mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the years I'd chased things that never mattered. I thought about the mornings I'd left early and the nights I'd come home too late to talk. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry at Linda. I felt angry at myself. A few days later, I got an unexpected call. David. It was Linda. Her voice was calm, almost formal. I heard you stopped by the bakery. Yes, I admitted softly. I wanted to see how you were doing. A pause. You could have come inside. I didn't think you'd want me to. She sighed. I don't hate you, David. I just couldn't live like that anymore. Something inside me loosened. I'd expected bitterness, maybe blame. But there was none. Just truth. I understand now, I said quietly. You wanted a simple life. I kept complicating it. Yes, she said, her tone almost sad. And you always thought success would fix everything. But it never fixed us. The line went silent for a few seconds before she added, You should come by sometime. Maybe for coffee. Not as husband and wife, just as people who used to share something good. It took me weeks to accept that invitation. But eventually, I did. When I finally walked into her bakery, she smiled in a way that felt familiar but distant. She poured me coffee, black, just the way I liked it. The air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. We talked for hours, about old memories, about how life had changed. She told me about how the bakery had saved her, how kneading dough became her therapy, how every loaf felt like a small victory. I told her about my long hours, my empty house, and how I'd begun volunteering at a local shelter just to feel useful again. Paul wasn't there that day. Maybe by chance, maybe by design. But his absence gave me the space to say what I needed to. Linda, I said softly, I used to think revenge meant making someone feel what you felt. But now, I just want peace. For both of us. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. That's the best kind of revenge, David. Peace. After that day, I didn't go back often. Once in a while, I'd stop by for bread or coffee. We'd exchange polite words, small smiles. It wasn't love anymore, it was something deeper. Understanding. Closure. But the story doesn't end there. Because while I had found acceptance, life wasn't done teaching me lessons. One evening, a few months later, my company went through a massive restructuring. I'd worked there for nearly 15 years, climbing every rung, giving it everything I had. But when the new management came in, they decided to trim the fat, as they called it. I was called into the office one morning. My boss, half my age, looked uncomfortable. David, I'm afraid your position is being made redundant. Redundant. That word hit harder than I expected. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply smiled, the same way I did the day Linda walked out. Thank you, I said. I understand. When I walked out of that office for the last time, I felt strangely light. No bitterness. No anger. Just an odd sense of freedom. For years, I'd tied my worth to that place. Losing it felt like losing myself, but now, it felt like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. A few days later, Linda called again. I heard about your job, she said gently. Are you okay? I'm fine, I replied. And for once, I meant it. You know, she hesitated, we've been trying to expand the bakery. We need someone to handle finances and marketing. You were always good with numbers. Would you consider helping, part-time? At first, I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. So, I said yes. Working with her again was strange at first. We kept things professional, polite. But over time, something changed. We found a rhythm, different from before, quieter, easier. She ran the kitchen, I managed the books. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. The bakery started to grow. We opened a second branch across town. The community loved us. It wasn't a corporate empire, but it was honest work. Simple. Peaceful. And that's when I realized the full circle of it all. Linda had wanted a simple life. I had wanted success. But when I lost everything I once chased, I found the simplicity she had longed for all along. One evening as we closed up, she said softly, "You know, David, life's funny. I left to find peace, and somehow you found it too, just later." I smiled. Better late than never. She laughed, that same gentle laugh I hadn't heard in years. And for the first time, I felt no regret, only gratitude. Revenge, I understood now, wasn't about payback. It was about balance. Life has a way of teaching lessons without cruelty, if you're patient enough to listen. And though we never got back together, in that quiet little bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and fading sunlight, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, peace is the final act of revenge. They say time smooths out even the deepest cracks, not by erasing them, but by softening the edges. That's how it felt in the months that followed. The bakery became my quiet world. Mornings started with the scent of coffee and the hum of ovens, not the sharp buzz of corporate emails. I traded board meetings for handwritten receipts, and deadlines for conversations with customers who smiled when they tasted something good. For the first time in years, I felt connected to life. Not racing past it. Linda and I worked side by side most days, though we kept a respectful distance. We had both changed too much to fall back into old patterns. Our conversations were simple, about sales, deliveries, suppliers. But underneath, there was a calm understanding. A mutual forgiveness that needed no words. Sometimes I'd catch her humming while decorating cakes, her face peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. And in those quiet moments, I realized she had been right all along. Happiness had never been about wealth or ambition. It had always been about peace, about being present, content, and kind to the life you already have. I had spent years chasing something I couldn't even define, and in the process, I'd lost what truly mattered. But working there, every loaf of bread and every smile we received from customers felt like a small step toward redemption. One rainy afternoon, we had a rush of customers, the kind of chaos that made the air smell like sugar and laughter. When things finally slowed, Linda sat beside me at the counter, sipping tea. "You've gotten good at this," she said, smiling faintly. "You even remember which regulars like extra buttercream." I chuckled. "Guess I finally learned to pay attention." She nodded, looking down at her cup. "You always had a good heart, David. You just got lost for a while." Her words hit gently, like a truth I'd always known but needed to hear out loud. That night, after closing up, I drove home through the quiet streets, the rain tapping softly on the windshield. I thought about everything that had happened, the rise, the fall, the distance, the forgiveness. And I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, life gives you a second chance, not to change the past, but to understand it. A few months later, the bakery's second branch opened. We invited the whole neighborhood. Balloons, lights, music, nothing fancy, just warmth. Linda handled the front while I managed logistics. At one point, a customer came up to me and said, "You and your wife make quite a team." I smiled politely. "We used to be married," I said. "Now, we just build things together." He looked surprised. "Must have ended well then." I thought about that for a second and nodded. It did, in its own way. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Linda came to stand beside me. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think we failed." I looked at her. "We didn't fail. We just learned the hard way." She smiled, that quiet, forgiving kind of smile. Maybe that's true. Over time, we both began to move on in our own directions. She started dating again, though she never mentioned names. I didn't ask. I respected her journey, just as she respected mine. As for me, I found contentment in the little things. Gardening, reading, even volunteering at the shelter became part of my rhythm. It wasn't the life I'd once imagined, but it was peaceful. And that peace, I realized, was something I'd spent my whole life searching for without knowing it. People often ask me if I regret losing Linda. I tell them the truth: I regret not listening to her sooner. I regret thinking success was louder than love. But I don't regret what came after. Because the man I am today only exists because of those mistakes. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what was worth keeping. About a year after the second bakery opened, Linda asked me to meet her at the park near the river. The same one we used to visit years ago, back when we were newly married and full of dreams. When I arrived, she was sitting on a bench, looking out at the water. She smiled when she saw me. "You remember this place?" "How could I forget?" I said. "We used to come here every Sunday." She nodded. "I wanted to thank you, David, for helping me build something good. I couldn't have done it without you." I smiled gently. "You would have. You always had the strength." She shook her head. "No. You gave it structure. You brought calm. Maybe not before, but now." We sat there for a while, saying nothing. Just the sound of the river flowing, slow and steady. Then she said, "Do you ever think about us?" I took a deep breath. Every day. But not with pain anymore. More like gratitude. Her eyes softened. "That's all I ever wanted. For us to find peace." And in that moment I knew, the story of us wasn't one of failure or betrayal. It was one of transformation. Not long after that conversation, Linda decided to move to another town to open a third bakery. She offered me a partnership, but I declined. "You don't need me anymore," I told her. "And honestly, I think it's time I build something of my own, not for ambition but for balance." She smiled. "Then I hope you find it, David. Whatever that looks like." We hugged, not as ex-lovers, but as two souls who had shared a chapter and were now ready to turn the page. When she left, I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace, the kind that comes when you've finally forgiven yourself. In the months that followed, I opened a small coffee shop downtown. Nothing fancy, just 4 tables, a counter, and a menu I wrote by hand. I called it Second Brew. When people asked about the name, I'd smile and say, because sometimes the second cup, like the second chance, tastes better. The shop became a little haven for quiet souls. Students, old couples, tired workers, they came not just for the coffee, but for the calm. I talked to them, listened to their stories. Some were about love, some about loss. But all of them reminded me how alike we all are in our search for peace. One afternoon, a customer came in and handed me a folded newspaper. "You've been mentioned," he said. It was an article about local businesses born from second chances. The bakery and my cafe were both featured. The headline read, "From broken roads to fresh starts, how 2 lives found new paths through simplicity." I read the piece slowly, a quiet smile spreading across my face. Sometimes, life really does have a sense of poetry. Months later, Linda came by unannounced. She looked happy, glowing, even. "I wanted to see it for myself," she said, glancing around the cafe. "You've built something beautiful." "Thank you," I replied. "Feels like home." She nodded. "You finally got your simple life too." "I guess I did," I said. "Just took me a while to understand what simple meant." She smiled, touched my hand gently, and said, "I'm proud of you, David." And that was it. No grand speech, no tears. Just peace, deep, unshakable peace. Years have passed since then. The bakery still runs strong. My cafe has become a quiet fixture in the neighborhood. I wake up early, brew the first cup, and watch the sunrise through the window. Sometimes, I still think about how everything unfolded. The mistakes, the lessons, the silence that followed. And I always come back to the same truth. Life's real revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about outgrowing the pain they left you with. It's about standing quietly in your own peace while the world rushes by. That's what Linda taught me. That's what loss taught me. When people ask what happened between us, I simply say, she wanted a simple life. I wanted success. But in the end, simplicity won, and it gave us both peace. And if there's one lesson I've carried ever since, it's this. Sometimes silence is the best revenge, not because it hurts others, but because it heals you. And when peace finally becomes your answer, you realize you've already won. It's been many years now since everything changed. Sometimes when I walk into my cafe in the early morning, the air still smells faintly of the past. Not in a painful way, but in a quiet, familiar one. The smell of roasted beans, the hum of the espresso machine, the golden light through the window. It reminds me of the mornings Linda used to hum while brewing coffee in our kitchen. Funny how life finds its way back to simplicity, even after you've lost it. I live alone these days, but not in loneliness. My life is calm. My world is small but peaceful. I know the names of my customers, the songs that play on the radio, the rhythm of the neighborhood waking up. Sometimes a couple walks in and I can see pieces of my old self in them, the young man impatient to succeed, the woman longing for peace. And I smile, not out of regret, but out of understanding. When they argue softly over something trivial, I see the echoes of all the times Linda and I did the same. When the man rushes off for a call, leaving her sitting alone with her coffee, I think of all the times I did that, unaware that each missed moment was a small goodbye. If I could go back, I wouldn't try to fix the past. I'd simply listen more. I'd watch her eyes when she spoke. I'd learn to sit in silence without needing to fill it. Because sometimes, love doesn't need fixing, it just needs presence. That's what I tell the younger ones who come here and talk about their relationships. I don't preach. I just share what I've learned. A boy named Ethan comes in often, early 30s, always tired, always distracted by his phone. One morning he sighed and said, "My wife says I don't talk to her anymore. But I'm just busy trying to build something for us, you know?" I smiled gently and said, "That's what I used to say too." He looked at me puzzled. What happened? I took a slow sip of coffee. I built everything except the one thing that mattered, us. He didn't respond right away, but I saw it in his eyes, the quiet pause that comes when truth settles in. Every now and then, Linda sends postcards. She moved 2 towns over, married a kind man named Mark, someone who appreciates her calm, the way I should have. Her bakeries are thriving. She always ends her notes with, "Hope your days are peaceful, David." They are. Her handwriting hasn't changed, neat, elegant, patient. Whenever I read her words, I feel something I can only describe as warmth. Not love as it once was, but love in its highest form, gratitude, goodwill, peace. People often think revenge means making someone pay for what they did. But with time, I learned the truth. Revenge is a mirror. It shows you what kind of person you become after being hurt. Some grow bitter. Others grow wise. I chose peace. Not because it was easier, but because it was the only path that didn't lead back to pain. The day Linda left, I thought my world had ended. But looking back now, I see it clearly. That was the day my real life began. The day I stopped chasing validation and started listening to silence. It's strange, isn't it? How the same silence that once felt unbearable now feels sacred. On quiet nights, I sometimes sit by the window of the cafe after closing. The streetlights paint long reflections on the wet pavement. I sip the last cup of coffee of the day and think about the long road that brought me here. I think about that younger version of myself, ambitious, restless, always chasing more. I think about Linda, patiently waiting for a man who never stopped running. And I think about how we both found peace, just not in the way we expected. If she were sitting here right now, I'd tell her, "You were right. A simple life really is enough." But deep down, I think she already knows I finally understand. I remember the last time we met, about 2 years ago. She came to the cafe one afternoon, no reason, no agenda. Just walked in, smiling. We sat by the window, the same way we used to sit at home on lazy Sundays. She told me about her husband, her travels, her plans to open another bakery. I told her about my little business, the people I'd met, the quiet joy of building something honest. Before leaving, she said, "You seem happy, David." "I am," I replied. "Truly." She smiled softly. Then we finally got what we wanted. That was the last time I saw her in person. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a chapter closing exactly where it was meant to. People who come to my cafe often ask if I ever plan to marry again. I usually smile and say, no need. I already met the person who taught me everything I needed to know about love. Because love, as I learned, isn't always meant to stay. Sometimes it just passes through to teach you who you're supposed to become. Linda taught me patience, humility, and the beauty of simplicity. Losing her taught me acceptance. And those lessons, they stay. Long after the people are gone. As the years roll by, I've found peace not in having more, but in needing less. I don't crave big houses or grand titles. I crave quiet mornings, kind faces, honest laughter. I crave moments that don't need to be captured, just lived. When I close my cafe each night, I look up at the hand-painted sign that says Second Brew. Underneath it, there's a smaller line I added later, one that sums up everything I've learned. Sometimes, life tastes better the second time. Because it truly does. The first time, I lived in noise, ambition, comparison, pride. The second time, I lived in awareness, peace, gratitude, stillness. And if I had to choose between the two, I'd choose this one every time. Now, when I think of Linda, it's not with sadness. It's with respect. She had the courage to walk away from noise long before I did. She knew that peace wasn't something you earn, it's something you choose. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. And maybe that's how life balances itself, by giving lessons only when we're ready to hear them. I once read a line that said, "Forgiveness is when you stop wishing the past was different." That's what I've learned. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a quiet decision you make every day, to let go, to stop looking backward, to stop defining yourself by what broke you. I forgave Linda. I forgave Paul. But most importantly, I forgave myself. And that's what set me free. When people ask how I found peace after everything, I tell them this story. Not as a tale of heartbreak, but as a story of transformation. Because every loss carries a lesson. Every ending carries a beginning. Linda always wanted a simple life. And I, after losing her, finally learned what that meant. So now, I sit here in my cafe, watching the morning light stretch across the counter, listening to the quiet hum of life moving on. I smile. Because I finally understand what she was trying to tell me all along. It was never about the house, or the money, or the plans. It was about moments. About peace. About presence. And after all the years, all the mistakes, all the noise, I found it. That's my story. And my quiet revenge. Because peace, real, steady, unshakable peace, is the one thing no one can take away from you once you've earned it. Sometimes silence is the best revenge, because in silence, you find yourself again. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest justice of all.